And we're back with something new. I am one of your hosts, Amber Solaris, and welcome to the first ever season of Reign of Pain, where we dive into the edges of desire, thrill of endurance, with the art of sadomasochism and pain-related play. So, this is your space to explore, educate, power. Whether you're a seasoned player or you're just beginning your journey into this form of play. So pain play isn't just about sensation, it's about that trust and connection and really transformation. Every episode here will shed light on different techniques, different explorations, journey. Of course, we'll talk about the safety stuff and the inner worlds of people who embrace the sting, the thud, and the different sensations while they surrender to seeing stars. So step into the night and embrace the unknown and find your own version of the Reign of Pain. And of course, as always, a little bit of a content warning. This is listener discretion advised. There is a content warning for potentially distressing topics. We will be discussing a multitude of adult-only topics here, and so you are encouraged to consider your own capacity before continuing. Hello, listeners! With me today is EtoileDC, coming from the DC area. So, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself for our listeners today?
Sure. My name online, as you said, is EtoileDC. I usually introduce myself as Meredith in person, but that is not an uncommon name. Well, it's an uncommon name, but online it's better to have something distinctive. So EtoileDC, EtoileDC is what I go by online. And yeah, I have actually been based in the DC area for like 90% of my life.
Fantastic. And so Meredith will be presenting a class that we are super excited for. It will be on all things bottoming for impact. And if you are familiar with our events, you know that we are huge on bottom-led education and active bottoming education. And so if you have also read the description of this class, you know it starts with getting the crap kicked out of you. So, excited little girl squeaks are coming from me here. Meredith, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in kink and active bottoming, especially for impact play?
Yeah, so I got started, my first kink activities were actually 24 years ago, I think. And that was in New York City. I was dating someone in New York at the time, and so I did some stuff up there. Um, but when we broke up, I kind of dropped out of the scene because I was, I was just gonna leave all this behind and stuff. Um, but it's hard to leave behind a really core part of your sexuality. And so about nine or 10 years ago or so, I decided I want to get back into the scene. And I did that at home in the DC and Baltimore area. So I have been doing education since 2016 or so. And I have been doing promoting active bottoming, as it were, pretty much the entire time, just because I think it is such an important skill that we really don't talk about. I have seen, some presenters offering bottoming classes, but I see, maybe 80% top focused skill classes at events compared to like 20% bottom focused skill classes. And while bottoms can go to top oriented classes and they will probably, learn things from it, it's really nice to be spoken to directly and be treated as an active part of the scene. A bottom is not just getting something done to them, you're contributing to what's going on in the scene. And so talking about ways to do that more effectively, to take care of yourself, to communicate is really important to me for any type of scene. But impact play is probably my favorite love in kink. So that was why I wanted to focus on, you know, making sure that people are getting hit safely, having a good time, and they know how to talk about it.
I absolutely loved that. So, again, we do talk a lot about bottoms as though they are passive objects with something just happening to them that is magically going to fulfill their desires instead of active participants in a scene, instead of co creators of a scene.
Right.
And I think we do a lot of disservice to bottoms and to tops by doing so. Uh, However, I think we struggle to think about or name bottom oriented skills, especially when it comes to receiving things like impact. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those skill sets actually look like other than lying there and getting hit?
Yeah, so I think for me, the most important skill a bottom can have is the ability to describe what they're feeling, to actually be able to put words to it. And obviously, there are situations where that isn't possible, whether you're gagged or you've ended up in subspace and you go nonverbal in that scenario. But to be able to communicate that, what type of pain does this feel like? Um, how hard is it? And do you want that more or less? To be able to express, whether um, something feels different in different parts of your body. For example, getting hit in the chest feels very different for me than getting hit in the stomach. And I think that's probably fairly universal. We don't often hit people in the stomach. I do like it, but it's a sometimes thing. And that's something that I have figured out through trial and error. And so then I could present that information to a top and say, if you want to go at me for a really long time, my chest is a great option, or my upper back is a great option. It doesn't mean you can't hit me other places, but I have the ability to communicate that, for me personally, my chest and upper back are even better than my arms and thighs, which are also very common places to do impact play. But I know what I like and I figured that out and I can share that with someone else. So definitely communication and understanding your own body are really important skills for bottoms to develop. Um, but also, I think in the case of impact play, protecting yourself and knowing what body parts are safe to have hit versus not, for example, or how to hold your body in positions to expose a certain body part versus another. So really, I guess, proprioceptive body awareness and being able to present something or retract something. If someone is just absolutely raining down on you with a flogger um, on your upper back and they hit you in the butt, but you hadn't negotiated for that, you didn't want that to happen, you know that you need to adjust your body positioning because now, obviously, floggers are going to go where they're going to go. A skilled top can still hit somewhere they didn't intend to. But you can position your body such that you can reduce the chance of getting hit somewhere that neither of you were planning for. So things like being aware of both internal and external, what to do with your body, And this also applies, to rope or to any other activity that you may want to do, is just being able to do things actively with your body to get the experience that you want and to be able to explain how to get to that place that you want, I think are some of the most important skills for bottoms to have.
I think that's also a key aspect of feeling empowered as a bottom and reducing the risk of freezing and not being able to speak up for your boundaries or not being able to communicate. When you have that skill set, you're far more likely to feel empowered to be able to communicate, in my experience.
Absolutely. I was recently doing a negotiation with someone that I am planning to play with at an event coming up. And we talked about in-scene communication. And I said that depending on the pain level, I will be extremely talkative. Like I will tell you what something feels like. I will tell you, what is going on for me so that you can adjust what you are doing and get to where you want to be. I have found that I have a reasonably high pain tolerance, but when I get to the upper limits of that, I find it harder to communicate. And so I will try to, let the top know ahead of time that if we go to that level, you need to be watching more. You need to be taking more time to pay attention to my reactions because I won't be able to at that point. But I'm a chatty bottom. I will, I will tell you if I like what you're doing or if I don't. And it's fun, I love a good comedic scene. I love laughing in a scene. So, assuming that I have negotiated it, I will curse like a sailor. But yeah, and just I have had scenes where we negotiated that I was going to lie there and take it. And that puts me in a very different headspace. Um, that was with a trusted partner, and we agreed that I was not going to move, regardless of what they did. I was going to stay still and not move. And it really put me in a space of feeling like a piece of meat, that I was just a body to be hit. And for that specific scene, that was really hot. But I will only do that with somebody that I have had a lot of experience with where I can trust them. Otherwise, no, I am in control as much as the top is because I need to feel empowered, as you said, and to take care of my own safety.
I love that. And as we have those empowered experiences with someone, we can eventually negotiate letting go of that power. I think
Yeah.
often the biggest mistake I see newer bottoms make is trying to jump in and lose that power immediately with someone.
Yeah. And I think people think of it as a goal. They think of it as a place they want to get to be able to just, quote unquote, have no limits. Which my favorite reference there is, of course you have limits. I brought a chainsaw. Uh, right? But like, and that, it's an extreme example, but if you say that you have no limits, you're telling me that you're not creative enough. And the top is absolutely that creative. So to have a goal of just achieving disempowerment is like, no, own your experience. For me, I want to be part of that. I want to own my experience. I want to contribute to me having a good time, especially with someone I've never played with before, because they don't know what is going to make me have a good time. You can talk about it all day long. And I have had like really hot Google documents where we write out everything we want to do, and it's fucking awesome. Sorry. It's really great to have that communication beforehand, but ultimately, I'm in control of my own happiness. So I need to make sure that I am aware of what's going on. And by trying to give away that power right away, then I can't guarantee that I'm going to have a good time. And I think that is leading down a path toward disappointment, maybe resentment, and just feeling like you're doing it because you have to. You thought you wanted to have this scene with someone, and so you went ahead and did the thing, but you didn't really keep your agency. And so it feels it's just a bummer to come out of a scene and go, man, that really didn't go the way I wanted it to. I was really hoping for X, Y, and Z, and they didn't do it. But if they didn't do it because you didn't speak up in the moment and tell them what you were hoping for, then you have given away your opportunity to have a good time. And so I think it's really important to speak up in a scene. And it's not that you're telling the top that they did anything wrong or they're a bad top or anything like that. It's just about saying, I want to create a space where we are both having fun.
Mm-hmm.
Most tops want to know that the bottom is enjoying the scene. And of course, in some situations, if you're working with a sadist from a masochist's perspective, enjoy is kind of in air quotes there, right? Like you're, it really, really sucked and you did not have a good time, but you're glad you did it. Whereas if you didn't set up that container, that environment, and didn't speak up and say, no, I'm not enjoying this, let's do something else, then you're not even getting to the point of love to, hate to love kind of thing. It's just, well, that didn't go the way I wanted it to. And maybe I'll never play with that person again, or maybe I won't do this again, or, maybe it's my fault that I didn't get what I wanted. And so developing that skill of speaking up is why you can have a good time, because then it's nobody's fault. You created a space where you're going to have fun, as opposed to, well, I wish I had spoken up.
Very few people, in my experience, want someone else to feel unfulfilled walking away from a scene.
Yeah,
Usually it is one of the biggest insecurities that I see people feel. They
yeah.
are terrified that someone else is going to feel unfulfilled walking away from a scene.
Yeah, and I mean, I certainly get that as a bottom. Was I good enough is a big, big thing for me. And there is no good enough. Obviously, we present who we are at that moment in time and we do what we're capable of doing. But the back of my head goes, oh, I hope I made the right noises. Um, I hope the scene was as long as they were hoping for and I didn't, tap out early and disappoint them. You know, it's definitely easy to feel like you should have done more than you did in an impact scene. I have had impact scenes last for 5 or 10 minutes because that was all I could take at that moment in time. And I mean, I'm disappointed because, I wanted to be able to take more, but my body was just not up for it at that time. And so I have to, again, have that awareness of what my body is doing and not put myself at risk by keeping going. I have to be willing to safe word because I might get injured if I don't. I might, encounter a lot of mental anguish if I let it go on longer than I should have. And so if I'm not feeling it, I'm going to call the scene and it's nobody's fault. It's just a matter of bodies do what they do. And so the only way to walk away and have it feel like it was a good thing is to safe word and say, I'm sorry, we have to stop, because otherwise we're both going to be upset that it was too much. I like to say, I always want to get 98% of what I wanted, not 102% of what I was looking for. And maybe sometimes I only get 20% of what I wanted, but at least I'm not going over what I can safely do for my mind and my body.
I love that. And I can tell you, I switch, of course, but I lean heavily toward the left side of the slash. I
Mhm.
get the same insecurities on my side. Will this person communicate with me? Will this person have what they're looking for? Will they feel like they're fulfilling me? And I'm not looking for a specific experience walking into these scenes. I'm looking to enjoy something with them as a person.
Yeah.
And still, as much as I say that, dozens of people say the same thing back to me. And yet, when we sit down and have that same discussion of, I tell them, I'm feeling insecure about this, or I'm having these thoughts. And then they can communicate the same thing to me, and we can laugh it off and talk about it.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes it a little bit easier, a little bit less awkward, with a little bit more security. I'm still human. They're still human. And we can talk about it. And I don't
Right.
have to be the big bad sadist who's always perfect and
Oh,
never afraid of hurting someone or never afraid of falling short or doing something wrong or being boring, you know? And it just makes a lot more sense to talk it out like that. And when people are willing to have that authenticity and agency, I'm far more likely to play with them and to go back to play with them again and again.
yeah. I think both sides of the slash are constantly striving for perfection.
Mhm.
I have to take everything the top dishes out, and the top has to be exactly, what the bottom is looking for. And we are human. And sometimes the top's body doesn't do what they want it to do that day. Or, sometimes maybe there's another scene going on in the dungeon and neither of you can get in the right headspace. I've stopped a scene because like there was something else going on and it was just like, oh my God, I cannot play around that right now. I just can't, whatever that may be. So we talk about authenticity in scenes. And as you say, I think that really means showing up as a human and not as you know, the idealized perfect top or bottom. But for me to show up and say, I have really been wanting to play with you. In fact, this, event that I've got coming up is, I'm traveling to another city for it. And so there is pressure there to be perfect, to walk in and have this perfect scene that we've been planning, because then I'm going to go home and I'm not going to see this person again for a long time. But you know what? If I show up to that scene and it is just not feeling right for me, maybe we'll just go have coffee, you know?
Mhm.
Maybe we'll just hang out and spend time together, because I never want to pretend that I'm having a good time. I mean, I suppose in the vanilla world, it might be akin to faking an orgasm.
Yep.
It's like, I don't want to, be like, oh, hit me harder when I'm just like, could you stop? this is so bad. Could you stop? For whatever reason, it's bad. Maybe somebody is showboating on the next piece of equipment and I'm distracted.
Yeah.
The flogging is going great, but if somebody's being an asshole somewhere else in the dungeon, I can't focus. So, like, there's any number of reasons to communicate mid-scene and to be honest and authentic and say, look, this is what I'm bringing to the table today. This is where I am. Is there something we can do with this? Or maybe, this body part that we were going to do something with, like, if I'm doing something sexual and I'm having an off day in terms of my sexual equipment, then can we do something else today instead? How can we adapt this? And to be willing to walk up and say, I can't do what we planned, but I'd still really like to do something else with you, is what you were saying about, I want to have an experience with this person. And instead of saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that thing today, can we have a rain check for another time? Turn it into something else. I had I had a play partner once who their disabilities were not letting them use their hands the way they wanted to that day. We turned it into a biting scene. It was great. They couldn't hit me. We had been planning for them to hit me and they couldn't hit me. Okay, they bit me. And it was fantastic. And so just being able to adapt is also another really important skill for bottoms to have, communicating, knowing your body and being adaptable and not thinking of it as failing, in quotes there, failing because you didn't give what you had talked about or you didn't give what you thought they wanted, where maybe they would have been happy with this other thing if only you had again spoken up and proposed it. Bottoms have rights too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing that I look for in bottoms is adaptive capacity. The ability to kind of roll with the punches and change according to what's going on. And to be resilient in that aspect. It is my favorite thing because things are going to change. Life is going to change. I'm disabled. My capacity can be way great, and then in 5 minutes, my hip could fall out of socket just walking across the room. And boom, I've got to change. And people have to understand that and work and be flexible around that. And so that is the A1 thing that I look for. And I think on this dual extreme that I see for bottom type individuals and switches as well is on one side, we have people who have this ideal that they want to stuff tops into this mold of you're going to do everything I want you to and be everything I want you to be perfectly. And then on the other side, you have the I bring nothing to the table and I just show up and you do everything to me. Kind of this dual extreme as the quote ideal or norm that people seem to think of as being a bottom. And sorry, continue.
I think part of the reason for that is people are afraid of topping from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
They've heard that phrase. They've heard people say topping from the bottom. And so they just do nothing instead. Yep. Because if they speak up at all, they're topping from the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But as I have had a partner say to me many, many times, tops are not mind readers. They don't know what your body reality is that day or your mental capacity that day for something. So you are not telling them what to do or how to do it. What you're communicating is what is happening for you internally, physically and mentally, because they have no way to know. So topping from the bottom, I tend to think of as you're hitting me wrong versus I am not enjoying you hitting me on that part of my body. Could you move? And then I will keep enjoying it more, as opposed to that's wrong. You're not doing this correctly, you know? So topping from the bottom can absolutely happen. Bratting can happen as well. Those are both completely separate from the active bottoming skill of communication. It's
Mm-hmm.
really just about communicating what's going on for you personally. Even if it's just, you know what, I can probably take 10 more punches. And after
Mm-hmm.
that, I'm going to be done. And so let's work on making these last 10 the best we can. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
telling you that, you know, you have to stop because you did anything wrong. It's just, I'm going to collapse and the scene is going to end naturally anyway if you go beyond 10. So let's make those 10 really good together by me telling you that I'm close to my limit.
Collaborating.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's really important to make that clear difference between topping from the bottom and collaborating, definitely.
Because dom bottoming is totally a thing. And it's a thing I love doing. Um, I will bottom and be entirely in control the entire time because I'm that bitch. And then I think when we talk about topping from the bottom, a lot of the time, I think what we're talking about is actually a violation of consent that people aren't necessarily willing to acknowledge really is a violation of consent of some form. And I think that's why it has such a negative reputation, is because it's actually harmful behavior, usually speaking, in some way. That goes against what has been negotiated or oversteps some sort of boundary line in the relationship. But because dominants are supposed to be in control, it's not recognized as such. So we call it topping from the bottom to make it more palatable, which is
Yeah.
bullshit to me. But you know, uh,
Yeah.
stigma. So, and then there is collaboration and active communication. To me, there is nothing more boring than beating a log.
Mm. Yeah.
That is so much effort and energy. I don't want to do it as often or as frequently because just the amount of psychological labor that has to go into that is immense. Versus people who give me a window into their reality and spark my creativity. Oh,
Yeah.
baby, I can throw dozens of scenes together that are far more creative within the blink of an eye. In fact, I have a play partner I call my instigator masochist.
Tell me what that means to you. I'm curious.
She is always sending me little snippets of pictures or maybe an idea or two, uh, saying something and kind of throwing herself under the bus. Not in a, not in a, oh, you have to do this to me, but giving me a window into her inner mind and into her inner world and the way that things work for her and her desires. And do I ever end up doing it exactly the way that she's said or the exact things that she's brought up? No, because that's not what she's after. She's after my take on it.
Yes, absolutely. I totally throw myself under the bus all the time. Like when I am planning to do something with somebody, I'll be like, but what if we did this terrible thing that is a really bad idea and we should definitely not do that, right? I do that kind of thing. And I don't even expect it to necessarily come up the next time we play or the next 3 times, but I've planted that seed.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe down the road, even if they don't remember where they got it from, I have definitely had tops think that a scene was their idea when I had really said something like 6 months back about wanting that particular type of scene, um, which is part of collaboration. It's you call it instigation, but it's really just saying, I think this would be cool. And then maybe at some point we do something like it.
You
Yeah, I love that.
steer me in the right direction. Tell me I'm in the right area here for what I'm doing with your body. And I can make the magic grow. You tell me that I'm in the right spot, and I can make it grow and build it from there.
And I appreciate that so much as a bottom, that particular type of creativity. My owner is a switch. And so I do service topping because that's what I've been ordered to do, right? So I have developed a couple of topping skills, but I never have any idea how to do what you're talking about, where, when we first started seeing each other, I needed like literal written scripts. First do this, then do this. At one point, we were using a D20 gaming dice where, write out a list of 20 things and I will roll the die to see which I'm going to do to you because I have no idea how to be creative like that. So I love when a top can take, that Instagram meme that I send and turn it into a scene. And I appreciate that so, so much because having tried to do it, I realize how much of a skill that is. It's not that I'm not creative, I'm extremely creative as a bottom. I just don't know what to do to create that space for someone else. So I'm extremely grateful for creative tops.
And yet, it takes for me having that security of knowing someone can communicate and knowing someone is showing up authentically and has that skill set to release that creativity. Because otherwise, I hit a dead end, man. It is literally writer's block. I actually have a whole class on it. It's burnout, and it's just like, nope, there is no creativity. It's not there. The charisma, the energy is just dead because it goes one way and it's not reciprocated.
Yeah, I think for those scenes where I am providing topping services, I have gotten to know my owner enough that I can now do it. I don't need a script. I haven't needed a script in years, but that's only because I know that one person so well. And so if you're playing with someone new, or maybe you've only played a few times, you don't have that window into their psyche that you've been talking about. So how can you possibly know what they want? You have to get that information. And I mean, it can be in the form of, pictures from the internet, because sometimes, again, as a bottom, it's hard to know necessarily what's going to create the feelings that I want. And that is my top negotiation question. I always want to know every time I negotiate, how do you want to feel during the scene and how do you want to feel after the scene? Those are my top two most important negotiation questions. Um, because I know how I want to feel, but maybe I don't know how to get there.
Mhm.
And so if I see something that inspires that feeling in me, then I want to share it and say, this is what I'm looking for. This is how this makes me feel. When I said I wanted to feel helpless, this is what I meant.
Hmm.
And sure, a top can come up with ways to make me feel helpless. But if I'm able to say, this specific image gave me the feeling that I'm looking for, it lets them build on that.
Mhm. I love it. I very much love it. And I love the collaborative aspect with it. And sometimes when I have someone that I know well, they want to be surprised. And I'm good with that. But I know them well. I know what works for them. I'm in their mind. I've spent sometimes years getting in their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you haven't had the time to get into someone's mind, then the bottom has to tell you. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, tops are not mind readers. It's funny how a lot of porn, tops are mind readers. And it's like, obviously porn is not real life, but like that part especially, if someone has figured it out, please tell me how, because I would like to teach every top ever, but I don't think anyone has. The only way we can quote unquote read minds is by having spent that time with that person and getting into their mind that way. Yeah.
It seems to be a huge fantasy because it's also in erotica and porn and is a huge request. I just can't do it. People like uh-uh.
Yeah.
And tops run themselves into the dirt trying,
Yeah.
or at least the good ones do.
Yeah. And again, it's not topping from the bottom for me to send a photo of someone with a boot on their head. It's
Mm-mm.
me saying, I think this looks really hot and I would like to feel that way. Please put your boot on my head. It's purely communication. Yeah.
It's not bad to communicate your desires. In fact, it's hot. Make your top feel desired.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because I'm sending it to them personally. I didn't post this on the internet and say, somebody come do this to me. I said, hey, I want you to do this to me. Yeah.
It's hot. It's hot to feel desired. It's something that surprisingly, as a top or D type, very few people do, in my experience. They may
Wow.
make comments about it, but very few people go through the effort of trying to make me feel desired as a person.
Mm.
Uh, they may say, I want this, or you're hot, but to go through the effort of being seductive or because the idea is that I'm supposed to be the one going after someone,
Yeah.
which, okay, fine,
I
but
mean,
it gets exhausting.
before the scene starts, nobody is more the aggressor than anyone else. You know,
Exactly.
before you're actually doing anything, you're on equal terms.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you're in a power exchange relationship, that may vary, but in general, no, you're both equally responsible for reaching out to each other. It's, you know, the top does not have to make the first move just because they're the top. No, until the scene starts and we say, okay, I'm going to do what you tell me to do now, I'm responsible for talking too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Very much so. And I think that is one of the biggest hints that I could give S types and bottoms is to take the time to make your top or D type feel desirable and to feel desired, other than you're hot, or because yes, we don't just want, we're not just pits of desire that go other ways. We also want to be desired there. And so the communication also must come our way. We're not mind readers.
Right. And it's also, and I'm really grateful to you for bringing this up. Thank you, because you know, it's honestly, it's probably something I should spend more time doing too. Um, to communicate why I'm interested in a person individually. Um, for I recently talked with someone who I saw them present a class, and then you know, a long time ago, and then later down the road I said, would you be interested in playing sometime? And I tried to make very sure I communicated that it was not just that I thought their class was good or that they have power as a presenter and therefore I want to play with them. And there was, you know, there was a period of time between the class and me inviting them to play, but it's not just for, you know, whatever reason of you're hot, but like I liked your energy during that event. You know, I watched you talking with other people and I liked the way you carried yourself, and just your general vibes made me really interested. And like, yes, you're physically hot, but also I like your brain, and that's what I want to play with. I would like you to do things to me because I think your brain is really cool.
And that statement right there, I don't know anyone who would turn that down.
Good. Maybe I should I will use it more, and it will hopefully work then. But yeah, no, brains are the hottest thing about a person, right? Like
They
you,
are.
you know, you hear about, you know, oh, you know, I'm into somebody's tits or somebody's ass, but like, no, I'm into somebody's brain above everything else.
Well, I promise you, I wouldn't turn that statement down. So, um, anyone listening, that's a hint. Achilles heel right there. Stop messaging me about your dick. If you say that, you're probably going to get what you want. Um, but yeah, no, that kind of communication is hot. Coming back, I see you, I want you. Statements coming back, just that communication. It does take some vulnerability,
Mm.
but yeah, it's still nice coming back. And I tried to offer the same thing of, I see that you have these skills. I see that you're able to communicate well in scenes, that you are mindful about the consent that you give, that you take your self-care seriously and are proactive about maintaining your mental health and well-being, and you're hot. So, um, like, you're really great here. Like, I play with you because XYZ, I think you have these skills and we're a good fit with personality. And then I fuck you afterwards because I think you're hot on top of
Nice. Yep.
that's how that works usually. So no, very lovely. But at its core, again, we're all human, no matter what side of the slash. We all have insecurities.
Mhm.
We all have worries. We're all worried about being rejected.
Yeah,
If we're
and I think it's also really important not to treat people as fetish delivery dispensers. I am not a vending machine that you know, put compliments into and get play.
Mm-mm.
Like, treat me like a human being. I need to have a conversation with someone before they start, you know, talking about what they want to do with me. I have to talk to them like a person, because if somebody comes up to me and says, wow, you could really take that cane, I am gonna, or even, you know, I bet I can break you. Oh, that one, you will never get to touch me. If you think that you can do better than someone else and, make me cry or whatever, you're never going to touch me, because that's not the starting point that I'm willing to go from.
Mm-mm.
If you have a conversation with me and you treat me like a human being, and we, discuss, like, the fact that I talk about mixing kink with my D&D game, if we're willing to talk about that first, then yeah, we can probably play. And if you think you're that badass top, then sure, I might be curious to see what you've got. But if you come up to me and say, "Oh, I can do better than them. I'll make you cry," then it's never going to happen. No, the door is closed. The door is closed before you even got a foot into it. No.
No, 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 no. Or on the other side, if you comment on my wall that you think I can't break you, the
Yep.
door is closed. My
Yep.
intention is not to break you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and in fact, the only people who will honestly ever even get a chance to quote unquote break me, meaning, really tear down my emotional, not defenses, but just, really strip me to that absolute lizard brain core, the only people who are going to get a chance to do that are people that I've played with multiple times.
Mhm.
And that's another form of protecting myself as a bottom is, for example, I don't go nonverbal in my first scene with someone. I won't let my brain get to that point. I can absolutely go nonverbal and, like, just, moans and screams totally. But I'm never going to do that the first time, because I need to be able to stop you. I need to
Yeah.
be able to tell you how I'm doing. And so the only way we're going to get to the point where I am just, a completely, just utterly, quote unquote, broken, it's not going to happen until at least the fifth time we've had an intense scene together. At least. Yeah.
And for me, it's going to be a long time with a lot of play in between. Because me personally, I have harm-based OCD.
Mm, mm.
So engaging, while I engage in a lot of heavy play, it's also a form of emotional sadomasochism for me. So it's very deep and complex on my end that I'm actually playing with aspects of my own fears of hurting someone. So pushing people into heavy headspaces and heavy edge play things has to be something that I absolutely know that we're going to bounce back from and have a strong relationship with and feel secure in that. Otherwise, I will break long before they.
Yeah, I for at the risk of sounding egotistical, I have a reputation as an edge player in my local community. People know that I do some really hard play. And I think that's why people have come up to me and wanted to so-called break me because they see that I can take a lot. But what they don't see is that I have also allowed myself to be, the test bed for someone who's never swung a flogger before.
Mhm.
I am happy because I have those communication skills. I can say, well, that was good, but here's how you might want to correct it. Okay, now go ahead and try that. Because I am so experienced as an impact bottom, I'm happy to teach people what they're doing to a bottom. Not teach them how to throw the flogger because I don't know, but I can teach them what it feels like on the other side of that flogger. So I don't ever want to be that, oh, I only do hardcore stuff. I don't ever want to get to a point where I am pigeonholed like that.
Yeah.
And yet I am. People think that I only do hard stuff. And it's like, sure, that's what I do for fun. But it also brings me so much joy to see someone improve their technique on me. I love that. And I've had people say, I don't know if I want to top. Can I hit you a few times and see what that feels like? And I've had them go, you know what? That was actually not very enjoyable for me. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm glad I helped you figure that out. Right. But like, it's, I have a range, and being put only on one side of that range means I don't want to play with you because you don't see me for all that I am.
Yep.
I do a lot of different things, and if you're only expecting one thing out of me, that again is, insert compliment, get play. It's not going to happen because you need to see who I am as a whole person before you get to even get your hands anywhere near me. Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. I remember actually one of my favorite pickup play scenes ever was a light spanking scene in a club. I was doing a small impact scene with one of my bottoms, who is a very heavy impact bottom, a heavy toy breaker.
Which, like, by the way, nobody has ever broken a paddle on my ass because I don't like sting, right? It's like, it's that again is not a lofty thing to aspire to for me. It's like, no, I don't like it. You're not going to get to do that because I don't like it.
Oh, I love it. And this little Spanko walked up to me and fell on her knees and was like, please, oh my God, will you spank me? And so I did a small 2-scene spanking for her to the music, and it was just joyous. Just an absolute joy for her and me to do this spanking scene. And it was light, so very light in comparison, but the amount of joy that she got from it, the amount of expression, the amount of meaning that she got from it, and the amount meant a lot to me personally. And I've always carried that with me, no matter how much crazy, dumb shit for science that I've done that I also probably should not have done. Um, and will continue to do.
Right.
Because
I love doing things for science. Someday I will learn, maybe.
I'm gonna continue doing it because I'm nuts and oh well. It's very much about that experience. And again, I'm a whole person and I get to decide what I'm doing. The person in that scene with me, or the people in that scene with me, get to decide that. And who knows what kind of magic is going to come out of it. And that is something I very much love, and I love that you brought up, is because again, don't pigeonhole me, don't stereotype me, don't assume what I like. Ask.
And I think that's the lesson right there. Don't assume, ask. And that goes for bottoms and tops both. Yeah, definitely.
So, after all of this conversation, I have a big reveal for some of our listeners who may be a little bit shocked to learn that Meredith is actually a deaf kinkster.
Yep, I have been reading the captions this entire time.
So I have been trying to speak a little bit slower than I usually do to make sure that she can keep up with me here.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. This is the first podcast I've ever done, because I can't listen to podcasts. So it's I have realized occasionally that I've been like nodding my head at you because you and I have our video on and we can see each other, but that won't translate to the podcast recording. And so I've been trying to remember to say yes and right and things like that because I'm not used to that in my day-to-day life, which for the most part, I use sign language in my day-to-day life. So it's been a really cool experience getting to try doing something that's audio based, even though I won't be able to listen to it after the fact.
Odd things, right? Odd things. So, do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about your experience as a Kinkster who is part of the deaf community and hard of hearing community?
Sure. Yeah. There is a deaf kink community, a deaf leather community. And a big reason for that is because the way we communicate is generally so different from the way hearing people communicate that it's like having to teach a 101 class every time you want to have a scene with somebody. I actually ended up posting a writing on my FetLife page that anybody who wants to play with me, I direct them to that. because it explains how to communicate with me. As I mentioned, my first language is American Sign Language. I do speak, obviously, and I know that I speak very clearly. And so people often don't realize that I'm the one doing all the work of communication. So instead of having to explain that every single time, I just posted something and I say, please go read this so that you can understand a little bit about what it's going to be like to play with me. And it is less comfortable for me to be in hearing kink spaces than it is to be in deaf kink spaces. But those deaf kink spaces have been shrinking a lot, which, happens in communities. A lot of stuff moves online, and you don't have, for example, International Deaf Leather no longer holds events. The organization has folded, unfortunately. It was founded in, I think, 1992 or so, and they closed down in 2021. And it's it has pushed a lot of us into the hearing community. And the most important thing for me, again, is for people to understand that I'm the one who is doing the work of communication. And I really appreciate it when people meet me part way. So, for example, as you mentioned, you have been speaking more slowly, which is probably why the captions have been as good as they have. I've been like waiting for them to mess up and me to have to ask you to repeat yourself, and I haven't, which is amazing. And that's because you're doing part of the work too. You're being mindful of how you're communicating to allow the technology to help us out. And that's also why, why we both have our video on, is so that I'm able to see your face. And you can't really read lips so well, but it helps me to understand your tone of voice because I can see your facial expression. So I think a lot of people, a lot of hearing kinksters are interested in welcoming deaf members into the community. I have a class that I teach called Playing with Deaf People, and it gets a huge audience every time I teach it because people want to be inclusive, but because there is frequently a communication barrier, they don't know how. And so it feels like, maybe some deaf people show up to an event, but they're over in the corner and they're talking to each other. And, if we're talking about a leather contest, there's an interpreter, but they're there for the contest. They're not there for socialization. And so it feels like a barrier to hearing people. Whereas for deaf people, we communicate with hearing people all the time. Like it is 90% of our day is communicating with hearing people, right? So we have techniques, we have ways of doing that, whether it's, writing on your phone, or if you're in a dungeon. Like I have seen a friend of mine have an entire written conversation with someone at a dungeon, just handwriting the whole thing out on paper, because that was the way that they could communicate, because they couldn't have their phones in the dungeon, obviously. So we have ways of doing it. And also, hearing people are way better at gesture than they think they are. Um, it's funny. I have walked up to a hearing person and gestured to them, and they just kind of stare at me like a deer in the headlights because they don't know how to communicate back to me. Whereas maybe if they see someone drop something on the street, they'll wave their arms and point. They use gesture to communicate, but then when they come up to a deaf person, they don't realize that they have those tools. So I think, first of all, it is incumbent on us as deaf people to show up to events for sure, but to know that there are people there who are going to be willing to communicate with us is what makes us able to go to events. And in a play scenario, to realize that there are ways for deaf people to both make safe words, to say a safe word, and to understand a safe word if they're topping. We have so many tools at our disposal, and deaf people are not really different in a kink sense. I mean, we have a community and a culture, yes, but like when it comes to kink, there's no reason for hearing and deaf people to not play with each other. It's just a matter of people being willing to meet us halfway. That's really important for me.
In the kink community, we are accustomed to dealing with disabilities. And being deaf and hard of hearing shouldn't be that different. It's just another difference to take into consideration.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's a matter of getting over the intimidation of having different languages. But I don't know a single deaf person who is not interested in trying, not every day necessarily. Like sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, why are hearing people? For sure. But we know how, it's like we're willing to make the effort. Please be willing to make the effort back. Don't be intimidated. Don't feel, well, if I can't sign fluently, then I can't talk to you. No, if you know the alphabet, that's a great place to start. Just meeting us halfway is actually the whole battle, I think.
I think from a hearing person's point of view, a lot of that barrier is fear of embarrassment.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. But think of the opportunities that you miss out on, right? Yeah.
I think people are afraid of embarrassing themselves and afraid of causing offense in some way.
Yeah, and that is true across disabilities, I think also. People will do gymnastics to get out of the way of a blind person in the street. Whereas, sometimes the cane is going to hit your foot, and that's okay. Or people will, give someone who's using a mobility device a really wide berth, but like it's not. I think people are so afraid of causing offense that they forget that there's a human being involved. If you only see the disability, then you are, again, pigeonholing that person. And just like we were talking about, don't pigeonhole me into a specific kink or something, don't pigeonhole me into just being a deaf person. When we talked about doing this podcast, my first thought was, is that something I can do? Am I okay with using my voice for as long as it's going to take? Because while I know that I can do this, the listening part is also really hard for me. So, probably when we're done here, I'm going to take out my hearing aids because I also have Bluetooth to connect to the computer so I can, hear and read captions and so forth. I'm going to take my hearing aids out and I'm going to be tired, but that's okay. The fact that Reign of Pain wanted to do a podcast with me is incredibly rewarding because I said, well, I'm deaf. And you said, okay, how can we make this work? And I appreciate that so much because even though I have basically zero experience with this sort of thing, my Spotify Unwrapped told me that I listened to music for 43 hours in 2024. In the entire year of 2024, I listened to music for 43 hours, which is not very much based on everyone else's Spotify Unwrapped. But like, I'm game to try something, sure. And so I really appreciate having this opportunity also. And thank you for letting me give my little spiel about communicating with deaf people also. I appreciate that.
It's something very important to me because several of my play partners have been deaf or hard of hearing as well. And differences like you wouldn't guess that they're hard of hearing, but differences like knowing not to walk up behind them and touch them on the shoulder.
Oh,
Um,
I have an extremely high startle response.
Mhm.
And so even someone passing me on a bike on the sidewalk, if I'm walking and someone passes me on a bike, I will just jump. So absolutely knowing that because I can't hear you come up behind me, I need you to come around or I'm gonna stick to the ceiling. Absolutely. Yeah.
So just having that awareness, and yet I know so many people who may not present as deaf, but are hard of hearing, are in that community, but don't communicate it the way that they would if it were more talked about. Uh,
Yeah, I absolutely fall into that category. I am guilty of sometimes not telling people that I'm deaf because I don't want to have a conversation about being deaf.
yeah.
I may only be understanding, 60% of what you're saying, but I'm just going to smile and nod for some of that because I'm trying to get laid here, not teach you what it's like to be me. So I make that choice sometimes where I will just accept the burden of communication because I have a different goal in mind than teaching you Deaf 101. As I
Right.
said, I have a class that is a Deaf 101 class, and part of what I do in that class is at the end, I say, okay, I'm a deaf person standing up here in front of you. I am giving you permission to ask me those questions you're afraid to ask a deaf person right now. But that's because I've put myself into that role of presenter for that, 90 minutes or whatever. And I'm saying I accept it in this time, but at the rest of the time, I may not want to. And that class I will only teach in my language. Any of my other classes, I prefer to teach them in sign. What I am planning to do for Reign of Pain is to teach it in sign and provide a voiceover and captions. But that is me presenting myself as a deaf person by my choice. But for the Playing with Deaf People class, I will only teach that one in my language because if you come into a classroom to learn about deaf people, you need to do it on my terms. And there's an interpreter. I'm not saying that, you won't understand me. I will teach it with an interpreter, but that's a requirement for teaching that class. Whereas for my other classes, maybe I will just get some help with understanding the audience, for example.
Which I think is a completely understandable and a good exercise for people. English speaking, hearing people are not accustomed to needing an interpreter.
Right.
And it's
Yep.
a damn good exercise for us to be in that position.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also, my two primary people, that I'm partnered with, that I play with, uh, they both know at least finger spelling and some signs. Because again, if you're interacting with me, you have to do it on my terms. And I get to make the call whether I want to speak for you. But sometimes I'm going to spell at you instead. Because if you are a part of my life like that, you're going to need to be able to communicate with me on my terms sometimes. Yeah.
Large swaths of our community may be hearing, but may also be nonverbal for various reasons.
Mm-hmm. I also hear from a lot of people who have auditory processing disorder and cannot handle music in a dungeon or something like that. Um, music in a dungeon doesn't bother me because the whole dungeon is just kind of a mess of sound for me. Like I'm gonna read your lips anyway because I cannot parse what is being said otherwise. But for people with auditory processing disorder, it is very confusing to be in a noisy dungeon. And what I usually suggest is that both for people with playing with someone with hearing loss or for APD is do the negotiation outside the dungeon where it's light, where it's quiet, because that moment of negotiation is where you're talking about safety and what you want and things like that. And then when we go into the dungeon and it is dark and loud, then our communication will be very limited. So let's have the important conversation up front. Or even, and like I said, I do this with Google Docs sometimes because then I have it written down and there is no chance of misunderstanding.
One of the things, it doesn't take a lot of effort to pause and think, if I were this person in this situation, what could other people do to make my life easier? And then do that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about having consideration for each other. It's really key to, everything we do in the scene is we just need to have consideration, I think, for what other people are going through and take that pause to think about it for a second from their perspective. Yeah.
It does not bother me to try to speak more clearly and a little bit more slowly while we're here on a video camera so that you can read my lips and my facial expressions a little bit more clearly, and the captions are a little bit more clear.
I will say they did finally make a mistake, or at least one that I finally noticed. It said that you were talking to a deaf person, DEATH, which is, of course, the most common caption mistake I think there is. So I appreciate that the captioning did that for us to just to give an example of how sometimes I'm doing an extra little bit of work to go, yeah, that's not what they said.
But no, thank you so much, Meredith, for taking the extra time and energy that it takes to come onto a show like this and to talk. Your voice and your opinions are invaluable, and I have very much enjoyed this chat.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a fantastic time. This was great. I love some of the things that we talked about. And I'm looking forward to getting the transcript because it was just a really great, like we had some really good things to reflect on. And yeah, I'm really excited. And thank you also for making the transcript available to folks. Because I know I've got deaf people who want to know what I said.
Absolutely. Well, folks, if you would like to follow Meredith, you can find her at EtoileDC, EtoileDC on FetLife. And be sure to catch her fantastic class on bottoming for impact play at Reign of Pain in February. And we will catch you all later. Thanks, and see you all next episode.